Hey friends, welcome back to my kitchen. I'm going to be doing another experiment with you guys today. I get asked so many times on my egg white bread recipes, can you just use fresh butter, fresh egg yolks, or fresh whole eggs instead of the butter powder, egg yolk powder, or whole egg powder? My answer to that is always, of course, you could do whatever you want. In my experience, when I have worked with fresh egg yolks and fresh liquid fats, I have gotten a very different effect on the bread than the powdered versions give. But after doing a little bit of math, I found that the amount of butter and egg yolk that I add via powder is very, very small. And I've never done a test loaf where I did fresh butter and fresh egg yolks in those same very small amounts. I was always working with at least one whole egg yolk, if not more. And after doing a little bit of math, I found that the amount of egg yolk powder that I add to my bread to get the really nice effect comes out to about half of a yolk, which is super, super small. And then for the butter powder, 1 tablespoon of butter powder equals about 1 teaspoon of butter. So I'm putting in a 1/4 cup of butter powder, which is equivalent to only 4 teaspoons of butter. So again, very small amount for a whole loaf. So it piqued my interest, and in order to answer people's questions effectively, I decided I'm going to experiment and do my current best loaf bread recipe. And instead of doing butter powder and yolk powder or whole egg powder, I am doing the equivalent amount of fresh melted cooled butter and half of an egg yolk. When I have experimented with adding yolks back into the bread previously, I ended up with pretty much a memory foam texture. So that is a possibility. But like I said, I've never done these small amounts, and I've never done the combination of the melted butter and the egg yolks. So I am really curious to see what happens, and let's just get started. So here are all of my ingredients. Of course, I'm going to start with water, egg white powder. I'm going to use a little bit of arrowroot starch, which is an optional ingredient, and you can omit it if you want the lowest carb count possible. I do think it adds a bit to the texture and the flavor of the bread, but you can decide what's most important for you. Some allulose, some unflavored beef gelatin, but any unflavored gelatin will work, some cream of tartar, some salt, and then at the end, I will add my 20 grams or 4 teaspoons of melted butter. I made sure to melt this ahead of time and let it sit here and cool, so I'm not adding hot butter to the batter. And then I have my 1 egg yolk in here that I am going to just try to scoop out half of it and put that in after the egg white batter has whipped up. You can't add anything with fat in it at the beginning or else the batter won't whip up correctly. First, I'm going to add my 1 1/4 cup of water to the bowl, and that's 295 milliliters. Then I'm just going to sprinkle my 1 teaspoon of gelatin powder over the top. I just sprinkle it over the top to make sure it doesn't clump at all. Next, I'm going to put in 100 grams of egg white powder. It's also called egg white protein powder or dried egg whites. As long as egg whites are the only ingredient, it should work just fine. 1/4 cup of allulose, and you can reduce the allulose down to as little as a tablespoon and still get some browning. The 1/4 of a cup gives you a really nice brown on the bread. 2 tablespoons of arrowroot starch, and that's about 16 grams. And again, you can omit this if you want the lowest carb count possible. 1/2 teaspoon of salt. I always use Redmond real salt. And 1 1/2 teaspoons of cream of tartar. I do a high amount of cream of tartar because it gives a little bit of a sour tang to the bread. If you don't like that sour tang, you can reduce it down to just 1/2 teaspoon and still get the same effect on the batter as far as stabilization goes. I'm going to just moisten everything up here real quick before I take it over to the mixer. I do have my oven preheated to 325, and I also have my pan ready to go with parchment paper. I'll start the mixer out on low and slowly increase the speed to high. And once I get to high speed, I will whip it for 3 to 5 minutes until I have a very thick batter. That went for about 4 minutes. And here is my yolk and butter mixture. I just mixed half of the yolk into the cooled melted butter, and I'm just going to add this and mix it up just until it's combined. Don't want to whip it at this point. I'm going to give the batter a quick stir just to make sure everything has been incorporated. This is all ready to throw into the oven. I'm going to put it in at 325 for 40 minutes. The 40 minutes is up and the loaf is looking real nice. I'm gonna let it cool. I'm gonna pull it out of the pan and let it cool completely, and then we will do a slice and compare. And through the magic of television, I already have my control loaf baked and cooled. It was made with my regular recipe without any modifications. Here are the two loaves side by side. This is the one with butter powder and yolk powder. This is the one with fresh butter and fresh egg yolk. They both look very nice. This one is already performing better than I expected. When I did yolk experiments before, the sides sunk in pretty bad, and I was expecting the same to happen from the fresh butter and the yolk. But it does have a little bit of sinkage, but really not a lot. So I'm optimistic, a little more optimistic than I was. I'm gonna go ahead and slice the butter powder and yolk powder one first. There is the texture on that one. Got some big, nice air bubbles, nice flat sides, beautiful loaf of bread. Now I'm gonna switch these. Hopefully that won't be too confusing for everybody. Slice the fresh butter, fresh yolk loaf. I am actually super impressed with this inside texture. I was expecting more like memory foam, like I got when I did my yolk experiments, but look at the inside texture. It's actually got some big, nice bubbles. Wow, I'm super, super impressed. One thing I am noticing is that this one feels a little bit wet. I don't know if you can hear that, but it feels kind of wet and it's a little bit spongy. This one, it's completely dry. So there is a little bit of difference there. This one looks more yellow. I don't know if that comes through on the video, but this one looks more yellow. And this one definitely is wetter. So let's do the pinch test on both of them. That's the fingerprint there. We'll do the same. Oh, it feels a lot more wet and gushy, kind of gushy. So when you press on it, it kind of feels gooey rather than just flattened bread, if that makes sense. All right, now for the taste test. I think I'm gonna do the control first. Of course, I know this tastes delicious. Very, very good. Now for this one. The flavor is good. As far as flavor, they're pretty much equivalent. The only difference I am seeing and tasting and noticing is the wetness. That really is the main thing. And that makes sense because really the only difference between these is that the butter and the yolk were dehydrated and liquid was removed. for this one, and this one just has more liquid in it. So there you go. It really has surprised me. I was expecting the memory foam texture to come through, and that really was not the case. So I think probably when I've done experiments with the fresh yolk and fresh butter before, it was just a matter of amount and not a matter of it being fresh. Because of the wetness factor, I definitely do still prefer this one. But if you can't afford butter powder or yolk powder or whole egg powder, or if you can't get it in your area, there are definitely still some options, and you don't have to settle for memory foam. Let me see if I can get the camera to pick up this wet sound, just so you know what I'm talking about. Thanks so much for coming along on this experiment with me. I definitely learned something new today. I hope it was helpful for all of you, and I will see you again in the next video.